Welcome back for another week of Bible study. Today we will be talking about the story of Abram, and I hope you enjoy. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Perfect. Recording's going, and I'm gonna go ahead and get the presentation on the screen. All right. All right. So, can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So we're picking up where we left off last week. We finished with Noah and the Tower of Babel. So today we're picking up right on the back of that. So we'll quickly go over why the Tower of Babel, the dispersion of languages, why that matters when it comes to genealogy. If you notice in the chapter, you'll see that they start with a long genealogy list. And starting with the third chapter and so on, you start seeing um different parts where they start breaking things down. Why is this person important? Why is that person important? This is when we start to get to the basis of the whole thing of faith when it comes to the Bible. We get to Abraham, and that's where the whole story unfolds from. So we had Adam and Eve. We got all the way down to Noah, creation pretty much 2.0, had the Tower of Babel. Now the world is being broken apart, culture is starting, and this is where we get our first story and where everything starts from. So, with that being said, we're going to jump into what we call the world map or the map of nations. Okay. So we'll take a quick detour from the Bible and kind of look at the map itself, the geography. Um, in the world, we have about 7,000 different languages, all stemming from one place. Why is this important? So the Tower of Babel, reason why it was such a pivotal thing was they finally started having technology. So instead of just using stones to make buildings, which all they had was they would look in the city or in the surrounding area if they can find certain stones, which is why the stone masons would use a certain stone if it didn't look right. If it wasn't measured, they had to have a stone quarry. If they couldn't do that, they couldn't build anything. But now that's no longer the case. They're baking bricks, they're making mud turn to tar, and they're pretty much making, in a sense, cement. They're putting these things together. Now the stonemasons are evolving their game. Now they can build buildings that will actually last through different type of storms. As we know, at the conclusion of the Tower of Babel, we get God confusing them with their languages. Now, stemming from that, the question was, how do we get all the languages that we have today? Now, like I said, we have about 7,000, give or take, to date. So that's including the dead languages and the languages that are still used worldwide. All right. So we have Noah to thank and his three sons. When they were on or in the Tower of Babel building it, there is the confusion of what exactly how the languages change. Of course, like we said last week, just to quickly go over, when we were talking about how the languages would kind of differ from each other, they would start with the same base. And what is the basis of language coming from Adam and Eve all the way down? You would start with different grunts, clicking noises, hand gestures, body movements to kind of communicate. Over time, that would evolve into more of a complex way of talking. So when you have that coming all the way down, there would be already a one voice, one language that everybody would speak. Once you have a confusion, now a hand gesture or a grunt doesn't make sense to the next person, which is how you would cause confusion. People get frustrated, and if you read it in the Hebrew, it speaks more of a frustration as to a point of, it's not that I don't understand what you're trying to convey to me, it's just I'm getting frustrated on trying to have to stop what I'm doing to understand what you're trying to get me to see. So eventually the Tower of Babel was abandoned. Once that's done with, we get back to the main story, which is Noah and his three sons. God told Noah and his three sons to go ahead and spread as far as they can and repopulate the world. All right, this is creation 2.0. So we have his three sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. If you guys remember from Sunday school, these are the same names that we hear about that popularized the world, and how we get all our cultures. Now we're going to look at Japheth first. All right. He had seven sons. They all had daughters, even though they're not mentioned. If you look up in the Hebrew text, like they have some Hebrew books that you can look up, they'll actually catalog their daughters. Probably not by full names, but by different demarcations. But Japhet had seven sons. He had Gomer, Magog, Madai, Tubal, Meshech, Tyrus, and Javan. All right. And I'll quickly go over why they're important. So Gomer, um, Japheth's first son, he was the father of the Gomerians, the Chimerians, pretty much the people who become the Celts and the Italic people. All right. Their descendants are on the entire continent of Europe. Magog was the father of the Scythians, so they're the ones who are breeders, and horse racing came from them. They're also known as the Goths. Um, the Franks, the Visigoths, those are their descendants. Madai was the father of the Medes and the Persians. Okay. Now we get to Meshech was the father of the Slavic people. And we have Javan, who was the father of the Ionians. The Ionians further evolved into what we know as today as the Greeks. Okay. Now we focus on these main four because they're the ones who kind of inhabited most of the European world that we know today. Um, the rest of his sons, like Tyrus, what did he do is he went further towards Asia and Russia, and that's where he pretty much his cultures would come down and end up becoming the main Russians in a sense. So the languages that are pretty much in these areas, we have the Celtics all the way to the west. We have the Ashkenaz, the Sanskrit, the Armenians, which would be the mountain dwellers. We're also getting close towards the Caucasus Mountains, and that's what evolves into the Armenian languages. Now, we're not going to stay too long on the languages, but just want you to understand when they are referencing certain languages and certain groups, this is what they're talking about as the world. Now, Magog is going towards Asia. Tubal and Tiris, they were the Siberian Paleo or Paleo-Siberian, so people in Russia. And Tiris would be going towards the New World. Okay. Like I said, you don't really need to remember all of this, but just to understand how the world languages would have been spread around the world and how certain cultures would have been influenced by these languages and why people speak certain tongues to this day. Now, the last thing about Japhet, when Noah gave him his blessing, his name was to be the great expander. He was going to have the biggest portion. He was going to expand around the whole entire world. And based off of his sons and their descendants, we pretty much have a good foundation of that being exactly what happened. Now we move to the next son, being Ham. Ham had four sons. He had Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Now, as you know, he pretty much populated Africa. Um, More importantly, Egypt, Ethiopia, um, Cush, and the land of Canaan, which is in the Middle East. Now, we call those languages the Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, and the Niger-Congo. Those languages, if you have anything that come off of those, that means they've come from Ham's descendants. So that includes everything from hieroglyphics to all the languages that have any type of clicking sounds to them. Now, next we have Shem, which would be the center. He's the one that pretty much stayed in between. So we have, for Shem, we have five sons: Elam, Ashar, Arphaxad, or Paxad, Lud, and Aram. So what's important about his sons is Elam is for the Elamites who end up fighting with the Israelites later on. Ashur for Syria. They also have the descendants of the Chaldeans, Lud, the father of the Lydians, and Aram also with the Syrians. Now, Lud is important because, again, he is the one who made the money, the first coin and currency for the ancient world. Elam, the Elamites become the Persians later on. Assyrians are the ones who end up taking over Egypt, or not Egypt, Israel, into the promised land. And Apraxad, he is our main character because from him is how we get to Abraham. Now, one thing I want you guys to write down if you are taking your notes, we've seen on TV and social media when somebody says something about um, Jewish people, any jokes or anything, they usually publicly apologize and they said, I was being anti-Semitic or, this and that. We usually say that whenever it's for a Jewish or a Jewish language, things like that. But in reality, all Semitic languages are anybody who is a descendant from Shem. So Akkadian is the oldest written Shemitic language or Semitic language. Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus spoke, is Semitic. Hebrew, of course, we know, which is also that leads to the Jewish. That's Semitic, and Arabic or Arabic is Semitic. We usually only focus on the Jewish. Anybody who's considered Hebrew, we don't consider them Semitic. So that's a lot of people who are in the Middle East. They actually do speak Arabic and they would be considered Semitic. But as you see how propaganda goes, we don't give them any respect. Now, if you ever hear anything Semitic in the future, this is just more of Shem's descendants. Why is it such a big thing about being Semitic? Let's say somebody from Egypt wanted to make a peace treaty from somebody from Persia. Back then, they wouldn't have the peace treaty written in their respective languages. What they would have used is Akkadian. So Akkadian would have been like the English that we use today. Even if you don't necessarily speak it or understand it fully, you can find English anywhere you go. That is pretty much a universal language at this point. So Akkadian was a universal language for the most part of the ancient world. And it was technically considered like a royal language. So if you were in a nobility, you would learn this language as well. It later on changed to Aramaic, which is why, as a preserved language, Jesus was still speaking it, even though the Greeks and the Romans had already taken over. And then after that is when it falls off. That's why you see the different demarcation with it being a lighter brown to a green. Um, this is the reason why we hold the whole Semitic subject in high regard, because it was how the world pretty much went around. You had the Akkadian language, you had Lud with the money, the currency. Aramaic led to our languages as far as alphabets and so on and so forth. And of course, Akkadian being the oldest written language, we literally had everything that you would use for school, thanks to Shemitic languages. So that's why that's such a big thing in the world whenever you offend a Jewish person. They have way too much history for the world. All right, moving on. So lineage is fixed, but language is fluid. As we start to see the Philistines and the Canaanites, they historically were Ham's descendants, but because they were so close to the Shemitic people, they ended up adopting and sometimes mixing the languages. Now, this is what today, if you trace all the languages, even till native tongues for Native Americans, people in the Caribbeans, people in Africa, people even in Australia, if you trace back their languages to the base roots of them, everything that's shaded in green is from Japhet or Japhet. Anything that's in orange or reddish orange is from Ham. Anything that's gold is for Shem. So I want you guys to look at Australia, the Aborigines. There is actually a clear distinction of going through, because Ham's descendants also followed after Japhet and went to the seas. They follow a trail that goes straight through the Indonesian peninsula to through the Philippines straight into Australia. And that's how we get the Aborigines in Australia, who are black, who speak an African tone and dialect with clicking that would make only sense if they came from Ham's lineage. Now, a linguistic alignment. So, Indo European languages all match Japhet's descendants in historical context. That's already been proven. So, we know that they follow that descendants line. If you look at the archaeology of it, the Hittites, the Greeks, and the Persians appear exactly where they're supposed to be on the map. So when we look at exactly when we pick up their burial sites, when you see somebody said they were buried in a certain city or location, that's been proven. And genetics, we can trace everything back to one central part, to the Mount Ararat. Now, to get back to the Bible and to get back to our main story, is there any questions before I move forward? Okay, so for our main subject, we got Noah, who has Shem. Shem has Proxad. Proxad has Salah. Salah has Eber. Now, Eber is the father of the Hebrews. Okay. From here, this is when everybody else that's born after him is known as Hebrew. Sometimes you can see Eber's name written with an H, but the H is silent. So most of the time it's just written as an Eber, or it can be written Heber. So if you ever see that, don't get confused. That's just the father of the Hebrews. So Salah has Eber. Eber has Peleg. Peleg is a twin. Um, Peleg has Ru. Ru has Serug. Serug has Nahor. And Nahor has Abram. That is his birth name. God later changes his name to Abraham, the one that we know as Father Abraham. So who is Abram? Again, we already know he's renamed later on as Abraham. His original name means exalted father. So Abram means exalted father. He was a polytheistic worshiper, meaning he worshiped many gods. He was a nomad from the Chaldeans, and he lived in a city called Ur. When the story starts, he is actually 75 years old, already an older man. Now, where he was living in the city of Ur was like what we would consider New York City today. That was their New York City. That was their hub where you can find everything. You can find commerce, you can find clothes, you can find incense, myrrh, you name it. Everything was there. They had um irrigation, they had fresh water, they had a way to get things in out of the city. This is where if you were rich, this is where you would live. This is when you made it. Um Abram at this point was a wealthy man. These people had a practice of worshiping to certain gods for each thing that they did. So for food, they had a food god. For rain, they had a rain god. If they wanted money, they had a money god. This is what it means that he was a polytheistic worshiper. Now, with Abram, we also have Sarai, who also gets renamed later on to Sarah, as we know. This beautiful lady is Abram's wife and also his half sister. Now, the Bible takes into account to detail multiple times that she was beautiful, very beautiful to the point where everybody would stop and look at her. That also made Abraham a little paranoid, but we'll get into that a little later. She cares deeply about Abram or Abraham, but she can also be stubborn. Her name gets changed to Sarah later on, as we know, but her name means princess. Now, one of the reasons why the Bible goes into detail on why Sarah, because we don't really focus most on women in the Bible, but we focus a lot on Sarai and to Sarah because she was barren. Being barren in the ancient world usually meant one of two things. You're just cursed, or you're not really important. You're eventually going to get put out. Your husband's going to find another wife to replace you eventually. Being barren was a death sentence for anybody because, again, if you can't give your husband a son or an heir to continue his lineage, all that money and everything that you guys gotten throughout your lifetime means absolutely nothing. It dies with you guys, and somebody else will get it. So she's 60, and she's already way past her time of having kids. Not only that, she's barren, and she knows that. So we start to see a lot of doubt from Abraham because of Sarai. So we also do have Lot, who is Abraham's nephew. Now, with Sarah not being able to have kids, Abraham's nephew from his brother Haran, he passed away when Abraham was really young and he already had a son. So for Abraham, what he did is he adopted Lot. And he pretty much told himself, with the fact that Sarah can't have kids, this will be my heir. He's related to me, he's family, he will be my heir. His name means veil or covering. So when you see the story and you kind of see what Abraham does for Lot, it's only because he looks at him like a son. Okay. So now we get back to Genesis 12 and we start to see what exactly happens in this story. So God calls Abram to leave his country, his people, his father's household to go to a land God would show him. This is what we call the divine command. Now, the issue is that a lot of people have, especially a lot of theologians, is how do we stop everything we're doing and just start worshiping or listening to one God when we have plenty of gods? You don't know this God, but all of a sudden he's talking to you and you're going to drop everything you're doing and just going to go do that. One of the things that God promised him, he gave him three promises. But one of the promises that he gave him was he was going to give him a son because a Messiah was going to come from his lines. And because of him, the world would be blessed or the earth would be blessed. So God told Abram to pack his things and he'll go to wherever he's preparing for him. Now, Abram, when he becomes Abraham, becomes the father of faith because that's what faith is, blind faith. You don't know what's tomorrow's going to happen. You don't know what's going to be blessed tomorrow. You don't know what's going to be cursed tomorrow. You don't know what you're going to eat. Abraham is coming from a land where he doesn't have to do anything. He has his mansion per se. He has his flock. He has his private little army. He has the people that were born with him that's trained. Everything is taken care of for him. He has his servants. And now somebody's telling him, he's hearing a voice telling him, hey, drop all that, take what's yours, take your wife, take your people, take your stuff, and keep it moving. Now, let's be honest. If God told you leave your car, leave all your stuff, leave your family, including kids if you have them, and go follow where I want you to go, how many of us are going to do it? Not many of us. So this is why he is credited with being the father of faith because he did something that most people would not be able to do. Now, the three promises. God promised him one to be a great nation. He said his descendants would turn into a great nation. He said, second, you would be blessed and your name would become great. You will be known forever. The blessing. So now, number three, you'll be a blessing to all people because through you, the rest of the world will be blessed. Now, as we talked about two Bible studies ago, we talked about the numbers that are going to be reoccurring. Three is the number that reoccurs a lot in Abraham's story. So, Genesis 12, verses 4 to 5, we have Abram obeying God's call without hesitation. He hears the three promises and he said, you know what? 75, still got time. Let's go. So he left the city of Haran that was inside of Ur, and he takes Sarai, Lot, and all of their possessions. So faith in the unknown. Like I said, we just talked about it. Abram didn't know exactly where he was going, but wherever God led him, he was down for the journey. Before we move further, any questions? All right.
I had a question about I going back over through from the like the from the hiatus kind of from the first recapping over this I didn't guess I didn't catch that um the half sister uh Sarai was Abraham's half sister.
Mm-hmm.
um so like how does that
Okay.
uh
So I feel like
with
I know where you're going with it, with
right,
the
just
legality with
family
that.
and yeah.
Okay. So back then, because the generations were not that filled, there weren't that many people in the world just yet. I mean, you got a couple thousand, but people are still trying to divide. So anything that we know about genetics is the less people that you have, the more you can actually interbreed with them without it being a problem. Pretty much meaning, kind of like Adam and Eve. Have two people, Adam could repopulate with one of his daughters, Eve could repopulate with one of her sons, so on and so forth, and they could all do it between each other. But once you get so many, and I think it's called the rule of 64, um, After the 64th person is when you start actually having the birth defects start. Once you get to that point, you can no longer interbreed. Can't have half sisters being your husband, wife, or being your wife, so on and so forth. But during this time, it was a necessity. Your culture after the Tower of Babel, you could only interbreed with your family. That's the only people you knew. You're in your own little area in the world. There's nobody else. So if your father has a wife, they have kids, and he has a second wife from the same clan, usually his half sister or his cousin, you would probably marry that daughter. And this is why, again, marriages were arranged back then to make it kind of easier of a process. And you would do that to have kids. Eventually, you would have enough kids in that group, whereas now this person sleeping with the next would be so far separated by lineage. You guys might be from the same family, but this is more of your third, second, second to third, fourth, fifth cousin, where there's not a lot of genetic similarities to actually have any issues when you guys have kids.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. You really broke it down and explained a lot. That makes a lot of sense. And how that he ends up being uh the or she's his half sister, so okay.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for
Um,
explaining that.
no problem. And believe it or not, there's actually outside of America, there's a lot of cultures who still actually interbreed. They'll have arranged marriages with second, third cousins or half sisters in that way, just to keep their family lineage the same culture. They don't want to mix with anybody else, so that way they don't lose, you know, who they are.
Right, okay. I see what you're saying.
All right. Um, moving forward. Any other questions? All right. So, okay. After Abram leaves Haran, this is when we're moving to now verses 5, going all the way to verses 9. Um, Abram and his household arrive in the land of Canaan. Okay. As we know from the genealogy, Ham's son Canaan, this is his land. All of his descendants live in this land. The Hittites, the Jebusites, all those people live in this area. Um, but this is where God told Abraham to settle. When he gets there, Abraham or Abram is a little dejected. He kind of feels a little, depressed. He gets to a new place. He's expecting just boom, I'm gonna have everything. And God has to pretty much come to him and be like, hey, look, relax. This is where I sent you. I promise you this is going to work. So he reaffirms his promise to him. So he's like, listen, I'm with you. I'm gonna protect you. Don't worry. So during this journey, Abram, every time he talks to God or he's praying, he has this habit of making a well. So he'll build an altar or a well, and this is where he'll pray, he'll dedicate it to God, and he'll say, I'm literally trying to hear a word from God. And he just keeps going around in the land of Canaan, just keeps going every single time, praying, building a well, praying, builds an altar, pray, builds a well. He starts to realize he's building so many wells and he hasn't heard nothing else from God. He starts to become depressed. Now, we don't talk about it a lot in church, but Abraham actually was somebody who dealt with a lot of depression. He had a lot of doubt. And quite frankly, this is really one of the realest people you'll see in the Bible. He is really one of us. God told you to do something, you're doing it. Now you pray again and ask for direction, and you hear crickets. Crickets. God, I thought this is what you want me to do. Now I'm out here just making all these wells just to pray to you every single time. I'm making sacrifices. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And nothing has changed. But what Abram doesn't realize is as he's making these wells, the altars are inside, but the wells is creating a border. And what he's doing when he's building this border is he's actually mapping out the land of Canaan that will become the promised land for the Israelites later on. And he doesn't even realize that he's literally setting the parameters, the boundaries for his fellow descendants. He just thinks, I'm praying and I'm not hearing anything. I want to give up. But he has a job to do. And I'm just aimlessly doing this. I'm just doing nothing. But he's laying a seed and he doesn't even realize it because he doesn't see the fruits immediately. So, one of the things I want to make as a key takeaway right here is what are you doing that you feel is aimless work or just busy work that is truly a seed for your future, a seed for your next job, a seed for a pay increase, a seed for your next career, seed for something that you're going to learn, seed for your family. Don't lose hope. If you see that depression starting to come, if God sent you somewhere, and if God truly puts you there, have faith that He will see you through. Abram didn't realize that he was literally just building the border. And yet, we as the reader, once we continue to read, we'll realize that Abram literally just did all the construction work. Everything's already outlined. They know exactly where to go. And these wells all have a name. Now, we're not going to get into the names of them because quite a lot of them. But like I said, all the wells become that line that marks off where the country is. The altars where they're praying become the big points of where these cities will be for the future. Now, while he's here, something that gives Abram even more doubt, he starts to freak out a little bit because I'm still doing this. I haven't heard nothing from God. Sarah still hasn't had a baby. I'm wasting my time. There is a famine that happens in the world. There's no more food. He's rich and he still can't even find food. He's trading his lambs, doing all this and that just to make food or make ends meet, and he's still not being able to have that happen. So he says, you know what? I'm going to leave this. Let's go to Egypt because they say they got food there. He tells his wife, he tells his family, let's just go ahead and give up. Now, again, in the English Bible, we don't necessarily see this interaction, but when we see it in the Hebrew Bible, because the Hebrew language or the Aramaic language is spoken in phrases, they're not as sophisticated as our alphabet, where we have a whole bunch of words to describe every little thing. The phrase that we get here actually speaks to a frustration, kind of like a parent comes home, he can't afford the bills, and he says, you know what, I give up. This is what we get from Abram at this moment. So he has a spiritual struggle with believing what God said for him. Now, because he's worried about how he's going to take care of his family, after he finishes getting into Egypt, he has his money, he has his stuff. They realize he's somebody of status. While he's going through the city, he realizes that everybody's looking at Sarah. And because of that, remember I said he was a little paranoid when it comes to his wife because of how beautiful she is. He looks at his wife and he becomes a coward. He says, "Okay, sweetheart, you're beautiful, but because we're here, we're rich, we're targets. If the Pharaoh or any high official ask, you are my sister, nothing more. You are just my sister. Sarai at first does not actually take kind to this, but because she doesn't want to upset Abram, she says, okay. So whenever they ask her, that's my brother, that's my sister. Pharaoh sees Sarai and asks, who is this? He says, it's my sister. He says, okay, your sister is beautiful. I want to add her to my harem. Pretty much, this is just my women that I'm going to be with. And immediately, Pharaoh takes Sarah. And in that moment, he is lavishing Abram with a place to stay, gives him a nice house, gives him more lambs, gives him more money, gives him more everything. So now Abram is now doubled of what he had. Abram at this time would have already been considered a bustling or budding millionaire. So he probably would have been anywhere from about 1.2 mil to about 5.6 mil. Okay, that's what you consider a budding millionaire. Once Pharaoh now gives him this money and all these resources, he's about anywhere from 2 times to almost 3 times that amount. So now he's just a regular millionaire. While Abram takes Sarai into his palace, Pharaoh takes her, and he starts to realize that there's plagues in his household. They're getting sick, they're dying out, and he's talking to his magicians, and he's like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Her." Once he realizes he has this dream from God, mind you, this is Genesis 12 verses 10 to 20. He has a dream from God that tells him he's being afflicted because of Sarah. Once Pharaoh learns the truth, he takes Sarah and takes her to Abram. He says, "Listen, take your woman. I don't want any stress, any problems with you or your God. Take everything that you have, everything I gave you as a gift, keep it. Just take them and leave." Now, Abram was scared. He was depressed. He was doubting. He was being a coward. And in spite of all that, God told him he was going to protect him no matter what. And instead of praying and asking God for help or asking for protection, the Pharaoh of Egypt, the only place in the ancient world right now that is actually having food, not only gave you a place to stay, a high place at that, he almost tripled how much you had coming through the door. You would have still had that without even lying because God was already going to protect you. Because Abram didn't trust God, he did things his own way. He ended up wasting time as opposed to just getting what he needed and leaving. This story right here, when he's in Egypt, is still another reflection of us in our daily lives. Okay, we're struggling. God told us to do one thing. We feel like we made some movement. Then we get to that point where we feel like we stalled out. And then have another situation happen. And then boom, we get to the end of that storm. And then we look back and like, well, had I did it this way, or if I did it with my mother, let her pray for me, or with a brother at the church, or just fasted or did something else, I wouldn't have spent all this time struggling and stressing out about what God already had planned for me. And this is where Abram is mentally at this moment. So they leave Egypt. He goes back to where he started building the wells. Okay. Some time goes by. We're in Genesis chapter 13 now. Some time goes by, and we start to realize that kids are being born. There's more people joining the ranks of Abram and his family. And as Abram and Lot are looking over their family, they start realizing that Lot's farmers and his workers are fighting with Abram's herdsmen and farmers. So to stop any issues from happening, Abram tells Lot, he's like, listen, son, I need you to look at what's going on, the situation, look upon the land, and you pick a side. Whatever side you pick, that's going to be yours. I'm going to take the other, but I'll let you pick first. And he's like, whenever you pick, pack up your stuff and you guys go. That'll be where you live. And that way we won't have any conflicts between our families, because it was getting to a point where they were starting to like fight and actually want to like separate for good. So Lot looks over the land and he sees the Jordan Valley, which is near Sodom. And he says, yo, that place looks great. There's lush grass. There's places for my animals to eat the grass and, just graze. It's very fertile. I'm going to go over there. So Abram says, you know what? I love you. Here's your blessings. Go in peace. After Lot departs, God shows back up and talks to Abram. Now, Abram is going through a panic attack, an anxiety attack, if anything. And this is the reason why God comes back. He's like, listen, relax, relax. He reaffirms yet again. He tells Abram, look, I have your back. Just relax. You see, all this land that you are left with, because you weren't selfish, all this land, even though it's just desert and it's dust and it doesn't look like it's much, all the dust that you see on the ground, all the grains of dirt, that's how numerous your descendants will be. God is trying to tell Abraham that, or Abram that, and in this dialogue from verses 14 to 17, Abram is hearing God, but he's not hearing God. He's like, yeah, I hear you. But the person who was going to be my descendant, who I was going to give all my stuff to, I just sent off to live in the Jordan Valley. He went west, and I'm to the east. How am I supposed to have descendants if the person who was going to be my heir, which is Lot, is no longer here with me? And God's just telling him, listen, I got you. Just keep going. So again, like I said, in the Hebrew writing, we have this pattern where we get like a high point in the writing with the phrases. So the phrases switch to being like exciting, and then it goes to a low point to being like depressed. Which, if you look through any type of test, like in a lab, is the same thing that you would get with somebody who's going through an anxiety attack. Okay. So as Abram is contemplating what God is telling him, he's starting to get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm just God's talking and I'm just gonna leave it where it's at. He says this is gonna happen. I don't really believe any of this is gonna happen. My wife can't have kids. I'm getting too old to have kids. The only person that I would have believed would have had a kid for me, or would have been my pretty much heir, is no longer here. And God's still telling me to believe. It's doubt. So we move forward. He's still depressed, living his life. And then we get what we consider in Genesis 14. This was the biggest war that happened in the ancient world. So we have the four local kings. They're called the four evil kings. And we have them going against the five kings in the valley. Okay. Now, when the four evil kings come and rout the five kings in the valley, they take over. So they start taking, just like at any type of wartime, prisoners of war. One of the people escape, and he goes back to Abram and he says, it's from Lot's camp. tells Abram, Lot and everybody else got captured. We need help. Now, Abram is a rich man. He already has his own private detail, his own security guard. That's one of the things that you do when you're rich. But again, he was never an army man, doesn't have a trained army. So Abram takes 318 men, trained men, which just means people who are strong, people who might know how to use a sword, a club, or how to do archery. So it doesn't mean that they're proficient with it, they just know how to use it. 318 trained men from his household. They get on horseback and they pursue their captors. Now, 318 men going against not one, not two, not three, but four different armies that just won a battle against five kings. They already outnumbered them and won. Obviously, they have some power. You're taking 318 men. You were doubting everything else, but you didn't doubt that you would win this battle. Gets over there. Not only do they use the cover of night when they get there, they confuse the enemy. And it's not like today where we have streetlights. They got out there, they routed them. Not only did they do that, they killed, destroyed, and got all their captives back. So this is where Abram again is starting to look up. The text starts to now change its tone back to excited because now Abram is excited. We just won. Ooh, we got this. We got this. We got Lot back. Boom. So when he's getting all his people back together, he has a special meeting with two kings. So the king of Sodom and the king of Salem, okay, which is what they call the great king Melchizedek. All right. We hear this name Melchizedek again in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, ironically. And pretty much his name means the king of Salem, which is also means the king of peace. Now, this person, no matter where anybody looks, he does not have a genealogy. He has no mother, he has no father, nobody knows where he came from. They just knew he was king of this place called Salem. Nobody knows when he died. Nobody knows where he went after he was done being king. They just knew he was a blessed king of peace. And when Abram seen him, he knew that he had the spirit of God. Abram also has written down that he resembles the Son of God. Now, Jesus is not on the scene yet. Jesus doesn't show up for probably another 4,000 years. But yet you said he resembles the Son of God. Once that happens, Abram says, you know what? I need to talk to you because obviously you have God's anointing. It's kind of like when you see that light on somebody, you just know that they're one of God's people. That's what type of moment he was having here. So he said, you know what? Let me talk to you because obviously you can help me. So when he's talking to Melchizedek, he asks him, you know, what can I do for you? And Melchizedek says, listen, you're doing fine. Trust in the Lord. Pretty much gives him a encouraging speech. And to thank him, Abram tithes. He takes 10% of everything that he has out of his whole camp, his people, his lambs, any money, any currency, anything that he has that's considered valuable. It takes 10% and he gives it to him. This is the first tithing that is done in the Bible. And this is where later on they use it as a basis. Paul uses it as a basis in the church as how to tithe, giving the 10%, giving the first portion of what you have, not because you owe something or because it's just a law, because this is something from your heart. Hey, you helped me. You gave me something that I can't ever pay for. So out of all the stuff that I have, here. here because you deserve to have the first portion of it, the best part. When that happens, King Melchizedek takes it, blesses him, and then when this is seen, you have the king of Sodom, who is the king of evil. He comes over there and he says, "Hey, listen, I can do you one better. Give me all the captors, and I'll give you 10 times more than you have," which would have technically made him like a billionaire in his day. "I'll give you 10 times more than what you have if you do this deal with me and not give it to him." And we have this transaction between Abram and the king of Sodom, and he says, "Listen, I just got blessed by somebody who is a blessed man. I know exactly what type of guy you are. And if I get into cahoots with you, you're going to probably say one day, I made Abram rich, when in reality, the Lord made me rich. I'm not going to get into league with you." He's like, "Least I even get a sandal strap from you. I want nothing to do with you." And this is how Abram solidifies his test of faith with God. So after this happens, we get Abram having a vision. God says pretty much, "You passed." And he says, "Listen, I'm going to give you a great reward." In this, we see Abram is going down. The effects of war, the battle, everything, all that is starting to calm down. That high is done. And he's like, "Well, it's back to the regular life. I have no kids." In this vision, he's talking with God, and God is bringing him out to this advance where he can see the galaxy. And Abraham's telling him, "Listen, I don't have no kids. You keep telling me that this is going to be happening for me. And as much as I want to believe it, I can't." So God says, "I'm going to make a formal covenant with you." Okay. And remember, we talked about what a covenant was in the last Bible study. But he says, "Listen, I'm promising you, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. They will inherit the lands from the river of Egypt all the way to the Euphrates." Genesis 15, verses 5 through 18. "Look up at the sky and count all the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offsprings be." I'll tell you right now, counting the grains of the desert sand, almost impossible. Counting all the stars in the skies, even on a clear night, almost impossible. Point being, you're not even going to be able to count how many descendants you will have. I just need you to trust me. So here is where we finish off with Abram, because now this is where the transformation is starting. After this vision, Abram starts to now think. The border for the land of Canaan is already built. He already has all the resources that he would ever need. All the key players are already there in his household. And God already has talked to him and given him his vision. So he says to himself, "You know what? God is telling me to trust him. For now, after that vision, I will trust him." So I leave at the end of chapter 15 and I stop right there. Like I told you guys last week, this is going to be a three-part story. We got the story of Abram, the story of Abram transforming to Abraham, and then the story of Abraham and the promise. So next week it'll be Abram turning to Abraham. So that's covering chapter 16, 17, 18, and 19. So do need you guys to read that because we will dive heavily into that next week. And I'm going to show you how this doubt and anxiety also now is going to get tested even further. And how when he gets through the anxiety and the doubts and the depression. God finally says, listen, I can now name you a new person because you are no longer a man of doubt, but a man of faith because you believed in me and you made it this far. So we'll get to that next week. Is there any questions? Any questions? Any questions before we finish out? Okay. So, um, Chris, I let you go ahead and pray us out, and we'll call it a night.
I thought Miss Tyra raised her hand.
Say that one more time.
No, I was clapping.
My fault,
Oh,
my fault.
okay. All right.
Alrighty.
Go ahead, bro.
Dear Heavenly Father, my fault. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us this chance to come together to study your word together as a family, to grow in your word together as a family, and to continue to lead our lives in the way that you choose. We thank you for bringing Henley to us and using him as a way to conduct your will. We ask that you please watch over all of us as we continue our respective weeks, to watch over all of our loved ones. And until we meet again, amen.
Amen. You guys
Amen.
be
Man.
safe.